What is going on, everyone? We are now live. We're going to wait for some people to hop in here, but tonight is going to be basically a fall smallmouth extravaganza. We're going to be talking about fall smallmouth fishing and how they move around their bodies of water based on the different weather conditions and water conditions that we're facing this time of year. So I've tried to record this video probably 3 or 4 times. I've sent the script to a couple buddies to have them review. But one of the hard parts with this piece of content for me is that there's so many variables. So I found it was going to be easier to just share it with you guys via live stream. That way you guys can ask questions and I can hopefully interact with you guys, obviously a little bit more than I can with a normal YouTube video. Confirm for me over in the chat if you can hear me and if there's no lag. I can't really tell with my setup right now because of basically a new setup. I'm rocking a new camera and everything, so we're going to check this thing out. But once you guys confirm that for me, we can actually dive into this live stream. But I'm going to present this as a seminar format, so I'm going to have some slides I want to share with you guys. And obviously, if you have questions throughout, we can answer the questions as we go through this thing. But basically, I just want to present this as a seminar so that way you guys can get the most out of this. And if you have questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat and we'll be good to go. Really appreciate everyone hopping on as well. I normally do a video, but this one has just been really challenging for me. So it's been one of those things where I've been struggling to effectively come up with a way to present this information. Awesome. Thank you guys. I love to see you guys hopping in here. I appreciate everyone. So basically what I'm going to be talking about in today's live stream is smallmouth movements and how they're impacted by different weather conditions, water temperatures, and water conditions that we're facing. What made me think about this was obviously the comments that I was getting, but also I was out fishing 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and I was catching fish really shallow on a square bill crankbait. Water temp was around 65 degrees and cooling, and I thought we were basically through the fall transition into basically the fall bite. I then went out about 2 weeks later, and the water temp had risen 3 degrees, and my fish had totally moved, and I had to make some adjustments on the water. And it got me thinking, like, there's so many variables that can move these fish this time of year, and it can be a very challenging time of year to go out and consistently stay on fish. I know you guys have mentioned that you have some struggles during the fall. I definitely have some struggles, and I want to give you guys what my starting points would be when I'm heading to my body's water to hopefully have as best of success as I possibly can. What's up, Steve, Dale? I appreciate everyone joining. So the first thing we're going to do is start by defining fall conditions. And really for me, fall conditions are anywhere from about 63 degrees to 48 degrees. A lot of guys talk about why smallmouth get up shallow and they feed this time of year, being that they're preparing for the winter. Guys are talking about these fish getting up shallow and gorging on bait fish and really feeding up heavily because they know the winter's coming. While that might be part of it, I actually believe that a big reason that they get up shallow and feed is similar to the reasons that they get up shallow and feed during the spring, which is optimal feeding temperatures. For me, what I believe is the best oxygen is shallow. There's an abundance of bait shallow, and those water temperatures get those fish active and willing and able to chase baits. So that's why I think we have so much success during the fall, and that's actually why I believe that these fish are up there feeding. Because if they were up there feeding to get fat for the winter, you would see them feeding all day, nonstop, constantly, but really it's in small bite windows. So everything has to be right. You have to be on the right area, around the right bait fish, with the right lure and presentation to get these fish to bite. But that's just personal opinion. I guess it doesn't really necessarily matter, but that is my opinion on why fish are pushing up shallow to feed during the fall. The other big thing that I'm looking for during the fall is cooling water temperatures, consistent cooling water temperatures, and colder nights. So you're having those days get a lot shorter. Your nights are obviously getting longer, and the water temps are starting to consistently fall. And when I start to see those consistent falling water temperatures, to me, that really is the kickoff of the fall bite. Once you hit that 63-degree mark, these fish are pushing up shallow, they're following bait, and those shorter days are really causing them to push up in that shallow water and feed aggressively. And then for me, the entire fall period is the transition period. This obviously is like the time of year that these fish are moving from deep water into mid depth and then shallow, and then obviously back out deep towards their wintering holes. So the entire fall for me is really a transitional period where these fish are going to be constantly moving and transitioning through their locations. So that's one thing I want you guys to keep in mind as we go through this information that I'm going to share with you. The entire fall period is the transition. There really is no break from the summer transition into the winter transition. They're constantly moving. When I'm thinking about ideal fall conditions, I'm really thinking about like consistent cooling nights. I don't want nights that go from 30 degrees one night to a 50-degree night the next to a 60-degree night. I want it to be consistent cool nights. And then I want the day temps to be between 55 and 65 degrees. The reason for that is that's going to keep that water stable. It's not going to cause it to really warm up or get really cold really quickly. So those really consistent days is something that I think are really important during the fall. The other thing that I want during the fall is sun with some wind. Now, I don't want it to be absolutely gassing. I think it makes it really hard to fish, but without wind, these fish will get really funky and they'll start to push out and spread out, and they won't position on places that they necessarily should. And then I want stable water clarity. So what I'm looking for are areas that you're not noticing giant water clarity changes. You're looking for areas where water clarity is pretty stable and these fish can push up shallow and effectively feed. Ethan, actually, this is a totally different presentation. I just used the same template. And then the other big thing is stable falling water temperatures. So I want these temperatures to be falling consistently, not like plummeting down and not like going up, but stable falling temps. So one day it's 61, one day it's 59, one day it's 58. One of the things we've faced recently is water temps that go from 68 degrees to 55 degrees really, really quickly. Alex Rudd is down there in the comments as well. So when you're starting to think about what is driving these fish shallow this time of year, the biggest deal is that, or when you're starting to think about fall smallmouth movements, these bass are moving from their deep summer holes. Basically in late September is the deepest that they're going to get in the year. And then they're going to start to find those highways moving shallow. So they're going to be following these transition points to move up into the shallow water. So your biggest key as you start to go throughout the summer to fall transition and into the fall is to figure out where these fish are going to be traveling this time of year. Now that can be points, that can be sloping, tapering flats, that can be actually like drains that are pushing up into a creek. You're looking for these areas that these bass are using to quickly move from that deep water to the shallow water. The other big thing that you're looking for are schools or pods of fish. Now, during the summer, we get into these pods that are like 200 fish big. You can like cast anything you want and immediately catch a bass. This is the time of year I'm looking for like 5 to 20 fish pods. They're not giant schools, but they're definitely like a pod of fish there, and they bite repeated casts. So this is a big thing that you're going to be looking for along those spots. So when you get a bite, you want to stop, slow down, and fish. And then the other big thing is that these falling temperatures and these fall conditions are going to trigger the bait fish to move shallow. There's a lot of bait fish that spawn in shallow water during the fall, and that's going to be a big driver, obviously, of bass pushing shallow to feed. And then the crawdad hatch is another big thing. Now, one thing that's really interesting to me is that I don't focus necessarily as much on crawdad eaters during the fall, but really mid to late September into October, you're going to have a crawdad hatch, and a lot of those crawfish become inactive or less active as that water falls into the low to mid 50-degree range. Before we dive into these smallmouth movements, any questions so far regarding any of the information that I presented? The comments are going nuts over there. I appreciate it. Okay. So let's start to talk about general smallmouth movements. Now, this is where we're going to start to talk about different water temperatures and what it's going to be doing to these bass and how they're going to utilize different areas based on different water temps. This is really the biggest question that I've gotten is where are fish going and how are they moving based upon different water temperatures? So for me, really that 68 plus degree mark, especially on the Great Lakes and our bigger inland bodies of water, is like summer or the very start of the fall transition. This is like when this fall transition is kicking off and these fish are starting their migration shallow. So for the most part, I'm going to be still fishing deep. These fish are going to be on those deep humps, these deep ridges, these hard drops, or even suspended out over the middle of our lakes feeding on bait fish. As we start to see that fall transition, that 68-degree, as it starts to fall down, you're going to start seeing these fish move move from their deep holes to the shallower water areas. So one of the biggest things here is really figuring out that highway and how they're going to move from that deep water to the shallow water. And there's a really great theory from Brandon Polinock, and I've heard a lot of other guys talk about this already, but it's called the percentage triangle. You want to figure out where they're going to be in the summer, where they're going to be at in the fall, and then build a triangle to figure out those stopping points in between. And you can really start to figure out like the key areas and really use this to pattern where these bass are at. So using that percentage triangle can be really, really effective this time of year, drawing a straight line between these areas and using that to really start to break down where these fish are located. For me, the real fall bite happens when that water temp hits like your low 60-degree range, 63 degrees to about 48-degree water temps. The biggest deal for me here is that these fish are pushing up shallow. This is when you're going to see giant congregations of fish moving into that shallow water. You're going to have relatively consistent pods, especially when they're biting. And I say especially when they're biting because the fall is a huge period for bite windows. So you'll get up shallow and you'll catch like 10 fish right in a row in a 30-minute span, and then all of a sudden they just seem to shut off. That's what I consider a bite window. Now you're going to notice a couple bite windows throughout the day. The first one is going to be like the first hour of light. Then you'll have another bite window typically in the middle of the day, depending on kind of where you're living. That's going to change day to day. And you can find that using apps like Bass Forecast, or Omnia now has a new platform where you guys can figure out like the moonrise, moonset, and figure out when your major and minor bite windows are going to be. But the big key here, 63 degrees to about 48 degrees is when these fish are going to move shallow. And this is what I'm going to be spending a lot of time on those shallow flats, on those shallow areas with power fishing techniques, trying to get these fish to bite. And then once you get like below 53 degrees, below that 50-degree mark, I'm going to start to push back out deep. You can still have days where you catch them up shallow. The biggest deal for me is going to be warming water temps. It's going to be sunny days, slick calm. These fish are going to be up in the shallows, kind of crawling around those isolated pieces of cover. But for the most part, when that water temp is below that 55-degree mark, that's when I'm going to start to push back out deep. The other big thing that we're going to notice, especially during the fall, are these giant weather swings. And this is where I struggle the most, because with these giant swings in the weather, these fish are going to move really, really quickly. So you're going to have fish that will one day be in 2 foot of water, the next day be in 15 foot of water, and then the next be in 5. So you're going to have to constantly figure out where these fish are going. Go out with a plan, but don't be locked into exactly what you know needs to be happening that day. You might have to relocate that school of fish day to day based on the weather and the conditions that you're being faced with. So start to dive into kind of the adjustments that I'm going to make based on different weather and water conditions. And this to me is really the meat and potatoes of this presentation. This to me is where you're going to be able to learn, I believe. Thank you very much, Dylan. I really appreciate you, man. This is really where I believe most guys are going to be able to learn the most, or give you guys a starting point. So if you get on the water and you start to notice some of these changes, how can you start to make adjustments? The biggest thing that you're going to notice during the fall are these super hard cold fronts. You're going to have days where the water temp is 65 degrees one day, and then you're fishing on a Saturday. The next Saturday you go out, the water temp that was 65 is now 52 degrees. This can be caused by a couple different things. The main one is going to be obviously cold weather pushing in. You're seeing day temps fall into the low 40s, upper 50-degree range, and your water temps are going to plummet. The other big thing that you could notice is a north wind blows in cold water, especially on the Great Lakes. That water temp can flip really, really fast. The biggest thing for me is a lot of times those shallow water fish, especially in that mid 50-degree range, they're not going to go super far. So if you found these fish shallow and you have a hard cold front, those fish aren't going to immediately abandon that area and go out to deep water. What I do during this situation is start to kind of push off that first break, find that deep water adjacent to that shallow water area, and start to look for where these fish might be located. The big thing here is that these shallow fish are going to fall off into that deeper water and start to congregate on like the first isolated piece of cover. So it can be really, really challenging to obviously locate them. But once you do, it's like game on, needle in a haystack. But once you do, they're all there. So what you're going to be doing when you hit a hard cold front is slow down. You're going to find isolated pieces of cover, and typically cover that will hold heat, such as grass or wood, or cover that will warm up really quickly, such as rock with the sun beating down on it. But those hard cold fronts for me are really all about locating where these fish push off into that deeper water and where they're now grouped up. One of my best days I ever had was after a really hard cold front. I was on these fish really shallow in about 4.5 foot of water. The weather like totally changed. My water temp went from upper 50-degree range to low 50s. And basically all the fish did was pushed off and got on a grass patch. The biggest deal for me was that I had to locate where that grass was at and fish a whole bunch of it to figure out the sweet spot. And what I found out later was that that grass patch had a hard spot on the bottom. So there was a bunch of bait in that area as well. The other big thing you're going to notice this time of year is really, really big warm fronts where your water temps are going to go up really quickly. And this to me is one of the hardest times of the year to figure out where these fish are going during those hard warm fronts. Obviously, if it's sunny and slick calm, you can push up shallow and start to sight fish these bass. The other big deal here is if you get that hard warm front and it's windy and it's overcast and it's nasty, these fish are going to start to spread out. So if it's sunny, flat, calm, you can push up shallow and start to sight fish or fish like shallow water. But if it's nasty, you're going to have to get off the break and you're going to have to try and like pick out onesie, twosie fish. Kind of what I explained earlier in the live stream was that I had a day where I was up shallow catching them on a square bill. The water temps went up. My fish that were up there were still a couple up on that rock, but a lot of them pushed off and they scattered out. So I just had to go back to covering water. A lot of times when you get these big warm fronts, these bass are going to become really, really active, but they're actually going to spread out across an area instead of group up. The other big deal here is water clarity is a really important consideration, because if that water clarity is okay, this is not good, but this is what we're going to rock for now. Can you guys see and hear me? My camera just overheated or something. If you guys can see and hear me, that's really all I care about right now. Okay. Essentially, a couple weeks ago, I was catching these fish shallow. They spread out. The hard warm fronts are a really, really tough time of year to figure out where these fish go because they tend to spread out in that deeper water. Also, I don't know why my camera literally has, like, it's down here, so it looks up at my double chin. It's just kind of funny to me. But the other big thing you're going to face this time of year is muddying water, dirtying water. For me, dirtying water can be a great time to power fish. If your water goes from really clean to dirty and it's stable, you can catch these fish pretty effectively. The challenge is going to be that first day or 2 days after that water gets really muddy. The reason for this is that these fish that are visual sight feeders tend to struggle with locating your bait. So one of the biggest things here is just essentially waiting for that stable or more stable water when they're going to start feeding. I don't fish. Like if I'm fishing one day and it's clean water and the very next day it's ultra muddy, you can slow down and really pick that area apart and maybe get a couple bites. But I found the best conditions are really when that water is stable. So when it stabilizes, even if it's been muddy a day or two, that's when you can start to really catch these fish again. The biggest deal here is that you're going to want to fish areas that you know there are concentrations of fish. When I'm fishing a new area and the water is really muddy, that's not where I'm looking. I'm only fishing muddying water if I know where the bass are located on those spots, because you have to be really particular about what you're throwing, where you're throwing it, and how to get these fish to bite. As you start to talk about getting cleaner water, a lot of times this is when that water is actually going to be falling, typically getting colder on you. And one of the biggest deals here is that I'm going to try and downsize my presentation and become much, much more finessey. I'm going to use more natural style presentations. I'm going to go to silent baits, and I'm going to typically slow down my presentation. A lot of times as that water gets really clean this time of year, those fish become very aware of their surroundings, even more so than usual. So you have to downsize your presentations. The other big deal, you can be around really aggressive fish, but the challenge being you have to really throw that bait on. You have to really throw that bait on them without spooking them off. So just be really understanding that as that water gets more clean, these fish that were aware of their surroundings are now even more aware. So we can start to talk about some baits and presentations that I like to throw during the fall. And obviously this is going to vary based on kind of the body of water that I'm fishing and the water clarity and the conditions. So one of the biggest deals for me is crankbaits. A crankbait for me is a really, really big player. It catches a ton of fish, and I think it's because you can cover so much water. I'm really going to choose the style of crankbait based on the body of water that I'm fishing and the depth that I'm fishing. But the one that's been catching me a ton of fish lately, wow, I wish that camera was working, is this Excite XB1 square bill. The reason that this has been such a player for me is because of my ability to cover water with it in super shallow water areas. We're facing water that's getting shallower on us, falling water levels, and so throwing a square bill in some of these areas in 3 to 5 foot of water has been really, really effective. I'll also throw a medium diving crankbait like a Duo Realis, M6511A, as I start to push off into that deeper water, an OSP Blitz, Rapala DT10, DT12, but it's just really going to depend really on the water clarity that I'm fishing and kind of the bait that does the best job of imitating the forage. The other big deal here is choosing colors that match the water clarity. So water clarity obviously is a huge thing during the fall. The biggest deal here is picking colors that match that clarity and also having a rattle or having a silent presentation. So one of the biggest deals is in dirty water, I'm choosing whites or really bold colors like that jailbreak color with a bright chartreuse back. Does a good job of imitating the shad, but also when that water gets off colored, it creates a presence in the water that draws fish to that bait. It also has like a one knocker rattle in it. And so it's a really loud presentation in the water. And I really like that one knocker, especially when that water is cold or cooling. The other big thing is when I'm fishing clean water, I'm going to those more translucent style colors, your natural colors, your herrings, your threadfin shads, your perch, those natural colors that look like the bait that they're feeding on. I also really like to throw a jerkbait this time of year. The biggest thing with a jerkbait is just how easy it is to change the cadence and the retrieve. Being able to dial in your presentation based on what these fish are feeding on and then changing that cadence, retrieve speed, and depth by either changing the sink rate of your bait, by changing how your bait acts in the water, and by changing the color or the bait that I'm throwing. One of the biggest deals is I like to throw a shallow diver most of the early fall into the mid fall. So for me, a shallow diving crankbait or a shallow diving jerkbait allows me to have a lot of control over that bait. I can make it sink by changing out the hooks or by adding a piece of suspense strip, or you can make that bait start to rise. You have so much control over shallow water bait as opposed to those deeper diving jerk baits. One of the biggest misconceptions is that deeper diving jerk baits naturally run deeper. They don't necessarily, they just have a bigger bill. So what that means is when you're fishing around cover, you can deflect them off cover more effectively, but you actually have a little bit less control. They tend to be more buoyant, and they tend maybe not to be as easily adjustable as those shallower diving jerk baits. Yeah, so some of my favorite jerk baits, unfortunately, is Duo Realis 110 SP. I really, really like that jerk bait, especially when I want a tall bait that doesn't have a ton of movement side to side. I fish a Berkeley Stunna quite a bit. You guys have seen that a lot on the channel. I found it doesn't work quite as well in the cold water. I don't know if it's because it has so much wiggle and roll. And then that Jackal, I like to throw just, it has so much noise. It doesn't work as good in the cold water either. It's a great spring water jerk bait, but I haven't had a ton of success about it or with that bait in the fall. When I'm throwing a jerk bait, really I'm looking for clean and sunny conditions with a little bit of wind. That's like the optimal conditions. But if you're fishing in clean and sunny conditions, I'm going to like those natural clear style colors. If it's clean and overcast, I'm going with those white-sided baits, basically match the hatch, but have a bait that has a little bit of presence in the water. If it's dirty and sunny, I'm going to bold colors like those table rock shad or something with some chartreuse and orange on the bait. And then if it's dirty and overcast, I am just straight up not throwing a jerk bait. There's other baits that I have a lot more confidence with when that water is dirty. Am I starting to lag really bad? My computer's making a really loud noise. And then I also really like to throw swim bait in the fall. It's really good for covering a lot of water and just getting bites. An underspin for me is something that is really, really effective, especially when you get around those giant pods of bait fish. The underspin has more presence. It's also really, really effective when you get in off-colored or dirtying water because you get that little bit extra thump from the blade. My buddy Ron got a giant largemouth throwing a spinnerbait up shallow. A spinnerbait is a bait that I don't have a ton of confidence in, but similar to a swim bait, it has that presence in the water. It looks like that school of bait fish. Does a really good job of drawing fish to the bait and just catches a lot of big ones. The other big thing is you have total control over a swim bait and variable depth. So I can fish it as shallow as I want, or one of the big things I do during the fall is take a small swim bait like this Beast Coast Slow Flow on a half-ounce head and bottom bounce this thing or crawl it back to the boat. So you have so much control over a small body swim bait. You can do so many things with it, and you can cover a variety of different depths. Now, I'm actually playing with a couple of different TFO rods on that swim bait. If I'm fishing shallow, I'll fish it on a bait casting setup, but if I'm fishing it deep, I'm fishing it on like a 7.3 or a 7.6 medium or medium heavy rod. If I'm fishing a bait caster, I'm fishing it on a 7.3 or 7.6 medium heavy or heavy power rod. The size swim bait I use on an underspin is about 3.5 inches. I'm throwing an Excite Shad Nasty. It's a bigger body bait. It's 4 inches long, but then I'll cut it down just a little bit and thread it on that underspin. Has a little bit bigger profile, but when I'm fishing it shallow, I really want a bigger profile, especially in the off-colored water. Color, I don't know necessarily how much it matters, but yeah, it does play a factor. Ben, yes, you can have a copy of this PowerPoint. If you want, my email is going to be on the last slide, I believe. I left it in there. Send me an email. I'll send you a copy of this PowerPoint. And then I also like to throw a finesse football jig or a tube. This for me is really about picking apart an area. Once I locate where these bass are at, slowing down with finesse football or a tube is a really, really effective way to catch them. My favorite is this Beast Coast OW Sniper, and then I'll put like a little Great Lakes Finesse Snack Craw on the back. Or another one that's really been slept on, not many guys are talking about this yet, is a Duo Realis Wriggle ND. The Wriggle ND is really, really good. It doesn't get a lot of talk because I don't think not a lot of people know about it, but it has that same buoyant Elastec style plastic. So it stands up off the back, which I believe is really important when you're fishing a bait really, really slow. It stands up, creates a presence and profile in the water that gets a lot of bites. So I basically determine which style of trailer I'm going to put on that based on how fast I want that bait to fall, and then the presence I want that bait to have once it gets on bottom. So if I'm fishing the Great Lakes, I'm typically going with a bait that looks more like a goby, that Duo Realis Wriggle ND, and if I'm fishing that on an inland body of water, I really like that small snack craw. as that water temp starts to fall and I want that bait to be more of a reaction presentation, I'll actually pick up that wriggle ND because it falls a lot more quickly. Yeah, I have a video that will come out on this, but I believe these fish start to get off of the craws. So they'll get on the bait fish, then they'll get on the craws and gobies, and then they'll get off of the craws and basically just really focus on bait fish later in the year. You can obviously still always catch them on bottom. I don't care how cold it is, but you can always catch this fish on bottom somehow. So I really appreciate you guys checking out this live stream. I can stay here and answer questions. This does not have to be the end. Might be a little bit awkward because my camera's down there, but I will still be on here. And that is my email if you guys want me to send you this PowerPoint. BRNOWAK fishing@gmail.com. I can also share with you guys a couple lake maps and break down some lake maps as well. And then if you guys want to buy from Omnia, I have a code for you guys to check out. If you're a first-time buyer from Omnia, I believe the code is OmniaBN, but it's linked down in the description so you guys can get 15% off your first Omnia order. It's a really good deal. It's off your entire cart, so whatever you buy on there, 15% off for first-time Omnia buyers. Okay, high clarity lakes, 20 to 25 feet. How would you consider deeper diving crankbaits? The big deal for me, so we have a lot of these glacial bodies of water, so you're going to have basically a shallow section of the lake that falls off into deeper water. I'm going to be fishing that break, and I'm going to cast that bait up into shallow water, and I'm going to bring it off the edge, especially off that edge when there's a piece of cover there. So I just fished a body of water last weekend. Let me see if I can pull it up without necessarily sharing it quite yet. But I fished a body of water last weekend, and like you mentioned, really, really clean water, hard breaks. I caught a couple fish on crankbaits. Let's see. Fishing a break similar to what we're talking about right here. Oh, yeah. Perfect. Okay. Let me share my screen. So this is the area that I was fishing. There is this area where there's these tighter contour lines and where it starts to open up into that deeper water. The reason that this is so effective, so right here you have these really tight contour lines. There's a small point that comes out, and then this is what I consider a sloping flat. It's where that flat right here starts to slope out or expand out and create. Well, these fish, and this is deep water. This is like 20, I would say 22 to 30 foot of water. I stay in this edge, basically in like 19 foot, and I cast up on that break, especially anywhere there's cover up here. And what those fish were doing is they were getting up here on this shallow cover, this grass. There was some wood up shallow. You could throw that crankbait like a Duo. This is the crankbait I was using. Duo MR or M6511A, which will hit bottom until it gets off the break. And that's how I was catching them. So I'd come through that grass, come out of the grass, and I'd catch that fish out of that piece of cover. You talking like bluffy bodies of water? Ooh, beta knock is so much fun. Swim bait and football head. Do you tend to go to a bigger swim bait, 3.8, or a smaller swim bait? Typically around that 3.5 inch mark is really my go-to all fall long. When I'm fishing a underspin, I'll go to like a 3.5 or 4 inch. Otherwise, I'm kind of downsizing to that medium size profile. That 4 inch Shad Nasty is like the smallest 4 inch swim bait I've ever fished. It's not a giant profile, but I'll bite it down, bite the head off that bait just a little bit, and it works really effectively. Beta knock just hit 50 degrees. Where would I be fishing? Well, I'll tell you. Beta knock's a place I've been twice. I've had relative success, but for me, a lot of my success has been in Big Bay, and I'm fishing these reefs where it drops off into shallow water. So, where is it? Ogons Bay, there's this island that comes out here, and there's these fingers that come off of this reef, and you can fish these fingers where it drops into deeper water. This is kind of what I'm looking for. These quick access to deep water, but you're still moderate depth. Like I think this is, 15 foot of water. And up here it comes up into like 5 or 6. So you're really looking for those accesses to quick accesses to deeper water areas. Also these little humps and these points that comes out. There's these reefs where you can quickly move up shallow, especially if there's wind blowing on these areas. These smallmouth will set up on these breaks. The other big thing about these bays is anywhere that you have these little inflows or inlets, there's going to be a ton of bait fish. So maybe that's not a great one right there, but you can get up into these shallower bays and you're going to see this giant influx of bait fish around where those inflows are. So that's really where I'm going to be fishing. And as that water pushes off into colder, or as that water starts to get colder, then you're going to fall off like out here into these depressions or flats where these fish can start to spread out and set up into that deep water. And I'm going to be looking for rock to sand transitions, areas where these fish can really set up in winter. There's so much going on, man. There's so much you can check out. I like Big Bay. That's just preference. I've never fished Little Bay, so I don't necessarily know, but Big Bay for me was where I spent a little bit of time. Surprised you haven't mentioned A-rigs. For me, A-rigs are really effective, but the problem is that there's so many regulations around fishing an A-rig that I don't necessarily promote them a ton. I've caught some fish, and it's also a very situational technique. You can catch them, but like I've never, outside of a couple times, there's certain lakes where I'm going to pick it up and there's certain lakes where I'm not. The big deal for me with an A-rig is I need to have the right depth range. I don't like to fish it really deeper than 20 foot of water for the most part. And then I need to be fishing around a ton of bait fish in that depth. So it catches them. It's just a lot more labor intensive than some of these other techniques. Any other questions that we want to chat about before we hop off here? I know my camera dying was not the best thing, but it sounds like the audio and the video is still working decently fine. So feel free to shoot me your questions or anything you'd like to hear me talk about. I think Dylan and I are going to try to get together this weekend or very, very soon. So Extreme Outdoorsman and I are going to go fishing somewhere. We'll just have to see where we get to go. The wind is gassing down here. Makes it hard to fish these big bodies of water. Okay, I have no other questions. I'm going to wrap it up, but I really appreciate everyone for joining. If you guys want to get a copy of those slide decks, you can. I dropped a GoPro in the lake. I dropped a whole pole in the lake. Okay, a couple questions just came in. No drop shot. I don't like to fish a drop shot this time of year. It's a bait that you can hold in a spot and catch some fish. But for me, those other techniques just catch more and bigger bass during the fall. A drop shot's just also like, it works, but it's I like to put it down once that water gets below like the 55-degree range. I actually grew up largemouth fishing. So a handful of years ago, that was like what I did in the fall. I don't know, man. I get such limited time. If the wind's really blowing hard, I'll go inland and largemouth fish. Ron knows. Ron and I went a couple weeks ago. But I also am just trying to differentiate myself. So it's a matter of YouTube, trying to be a little bit different than everyone else. And then also just my personal preference. I really like catching smallmouth. Even when I can go on a largemouth lake, if it's a mixed lake, I'll stay out deep and try to catch smallmouth. That's just preference, though. But yeah, if you guys want a copy of the slide deck, BRNOWAK fishing@gmail.com. I'll send you a copy of this slide deck for you guys to check out. But if you at Bass Assassin. If you guys haven't already hit the like button, share it with your friends. Let's keep growing this community. And if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. I'm working on launching a paid membership option. I still want to refine those paid memberships, but if you guys are interested in supporting the channel in any way, you guys can go check out the paid membership options. I'm going to be doing a monthly members only live stream. I want to change that for the $10 bucket. And then I'll have lake map breakdowns for the $30 option, as well as a separate exclusive content, such as like just going through my crankbait box or talking about drop shot baits, or give you guys more in-depth options or videos that I'm going to be posting on my regular channel. Also, early access to videos, just tons of cool things for you guys to check out if you'd like to consider subscribing to that. Definitely not obligated, but really, really appreciate it. Ben Ick, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone that's dropped some money into this, but really, really means a lot to me. Definitely no obligation to send me money, but I appreciate it. Zona had a show where he smoked him straight on. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Zona gets on this bite where he gets on these wave trenches. And so what happens is these waves will push sand in these trenches, and these fish will congregate in certain spots on those trenches where there's cover in the sand. I've gotten on this a couple times, but it's never something where I can consistently do it. We don't have a lot of lakes that set up that way down here by me. But if you go up north, you have these sand lakes, and where these wave trenches form, you'll basically get deposits, and that's where the bass will hang out and set up on. They're not just all over every sand trench. The wind plays a big factor, and then finding the right pieces of cover and mix of cover and structure is really, really important. Also, depth can be a really big factor in the weather. Ron and myself and Nathan went out to a lake where he was doing that sand trench thing, the wave trench thing. A couple days after he had a phenomenal day, we absolutely struggled. The conditions were just so much different. And we didn't really have a phenomenal day out there. Yeah, Alex and I we still talk every day. We just haven't gotten together this year. We did. I went down there for his dad's passing, but beyond that, we just haven't had a chance. I was going to go over the Bailey Serious Angler's wedding this weekend, but just some family stuff came up. I can't make it down there. So I would have seen Alex and Andy and Bailey and everyone else over at that thing. Yeah. Hit me up. Email me. Shoot me a message on Instagram. I'd love to chat. I like to talk fishing. So if you guys ever have any questions, hit me up on Instagram. We can chat for sure. Really appreciate everyone watching the live stream. If you guys enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. Let's keep growing this community. And I'm actually going to go out and work on the boat. Steve Marchioni mentioned that he can't wait to see the marine mat in my boat. I have to go get that thing ready. I want to get it in before the end of the year. It's going to start getting cold, and I'm not going to be able to do it if I don't get it in like this weekend. So that is the goal. I'll definitely try to record that and share it with you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.